Manchester with a friend who a friend of mine is spearheading to kind of address the issue of sizeism at the St. John Fisher campus. So then we're going to talk about, what are some of the ways that we can begin addressing this on campus. Now, sizeism can occur and I don't know if you saw what Jessica put, this meeting is being recorded because there are a number of people who would like to attend and had other commitments. So this is being recorded. Where was I? Yes, so sizeism is something that is experienced by people on both ends of the spectrum. You can experience sizeism as a larger person and as a very small and thin person. I personally am focusing today on the experiences of people with larger bodies, because of the fact that while people with smaller bodies do certainly experience oppression and discrimination on a micro level, the world in general is not set up to facilitate the movement of larger bodies through it. And that's going to go down to a concept that's called critical fat theory. Now, we've probably all heard of critical theory. We've heard of critical race theory. This emerged from other schools of critical theory, which is saying that the world is basically set up to exclude people with larger bodies from easy movement and to exclude people with larger bodies from participation. So when systems, when facilities, when programs generally are designed, they're not designed to facilitate access of people who are living in larger bodies. So just to start with, that's the framework that we're going to be looking at this from. So before I was fortunate enough to come here to Brockport, I taught for 4 years in semi-rural Texas, in the Texas Panhandle. And there were a number of experiences that I saw happen to students that I want to speak about. And again, this was only in the past few years. Okay, hello, unknown participant. So one particular student who I'm just going to refer to as Kay, this was a young woman who, when she came into my class, it was the beginning of her junior year. I want to say she had just turned 20 years old, and the desks in the classroom were much too small for her. And there were no other options in the classroom for her to be able to sit. There were no desks. There were no, chairless desks. There were no tables. There were no individual chairs. So what Kay had to do was she had to actually sit on the floor in the back of the classroom in order to try to learn. This was statistics. We're not talking about a class that's, kind of easy to learn. So this young woman was forced to sit on the floor in a statistics classroom to try to learn a class that she could not proceed in her degree without passing. There was absolutely no accommodation in place in this classroom for anybody who could not fit into one of those desks. And those of us who have been in a classroom lately know those desks are unforgiving for even people who don't identify as being fat or obese. So that was an experience with Kay. There was another experience with another student of larger size who did manage to sit in one of the desks because there were no other options. And that desk actually ended up collapsing in class because it was not built to withstand anything other than a standard size body. So what we ended up having to do was actually move some of these seats out from the hallways, the benches, some of those almost cafe seating, moving them into classrooms. We did that individually for each class to be sure that every student was able to sit in a chair that was comfortable for them, as comfortable as it could be. So when you consider having to learn in a college classroom, and the first thing that you think about when you walk in is, where can I sit that I'm going to fit into a chair? Where is there a place where I don't have to worry about the furniture collapsing or worry about the pain I'm going to endure from trying to fit into a place that's not built for me? Since I'm here at Brockport, there are a number of experiences. Now, those of you, can you raise your hand if you're familiar with the different facilities on campus? Okay. So a number of you are familiar with the facilities. I want you to think about, if you've been there, the room Edwards 107. How many of you are familiar with Edwards 107? Okay. Edwards 107 is, to me, the epitome of being inaccessible on campus. In that classroom, there are very narrow rows, many very narrow rows of standard desks with almost no room to move between them. There is no place apart from those desks except for the table all the way up in the front for people to sit. So if somebody who does not fit into a desk wants to sit, they have two options: sitting at the table that is meant for the instructor or sitting on the floor. Those are the only options in that classroom. So some of the experiences I've seen from students in that classroom, I had a student in there about a year and a half ago who had to start bringing a pillow with her to class to put between her stomach and the edge of the desk, because as she showed me, she would get up from class and she would have dark red welts on her stomach and her thighs because of the pain that that desk inflicted. There are other students in that same classroom who, again, could not fit into the desk. I would give this particular student, the instructor's chair from the front, and she would have to sit on that chair and turn a desk around backwards to use the table portion of it. Those are not optimal conditions under which to try to learn. And I want you to imagine somebody, if not yourself, somebody that you love and care about, having to walk into that classroom. It could be a daughter or son. It could be a parent. It could be a sibling, just a very good friend. And imagine somebody that you care about worrying when they walk into a classroom, not about how well they're going to do on an exam, not about how well they did on a paper, but about how or whether they're going to fit into a desk so they can even participate in class. Just want you to imagine that for a moment. That's not conducive to learning. And, in this time when we are definitely worried about student engagement, when we're worried about, students attending college, student enrollment, when students come, and I can guarantee you as a larger student, when students come to look at facilities to see if they want to attend college, if larger students walk into a classroom and immediately see that that classroom is not going to accommodate the physical body they occupy, they're not going to come to this college. They are not going to come to a place where from the get-go feels like it is not made for them or will welcome them as part of the community. So I want to go into a few issues of Sizeism, and this has been some of the focus of my scholarship. Sizeism is considered one of the remaining acceptable forms of discrimination and oppression. And the reason for that is because being fat, and I'm going to use the term fat because I don't like the term obese, and I'll explain why. Because fatness is seen as a moral failing. People believe if you are somebody who is perceived as fat, that is because you somehow failed at not being fat. Because you did something wrong, you lacked self-discipline, you engaged in some lifestyle choice that left you in this body that people don't want to see and don't want to accept as part of the world around them. So people look at fat people as being deserving of not dignity and not acceptance, but revulsion and scorn. And again, that is because we inherently look at people who are fat as the fact that they are fat because of something they did or didn't do. Did they eat? Did they not exercise? Did they have a sedentary lifestyle? What lifestyle did they engage in that caused them to be fat? So the first thing we do when we see somebody who is large is we think to ourselves, what moral judgment am I going to make about them and about what space they deserve to occupy? Statistically, fat students have worse education outcomes.
Unknown participant is now joining.
Okay. They are more likely to not complete college. They're more likely to drop out of high school in the first place. There are a number of reasons for that. Some of it is that they learn that the college physical environment is not conducive to their learning. Educators, when polled, when surveyed, have said that they look down on students of size, and students of size are more likely to receive more punitive grades on the same work as students who are smaller in size. Fat people are more likely to have poor health outcomes. And again, that's for a number of reasons. Now, I want to just make the statement that medically obese people, and obesity is a medical term. It's not a term that we really use in the fat community because obesity is something that the medical community has used to identify us as patients. Medical obesity, which starts, I believe, at any BMI over 25%, over 25, which BMI is an issue in and of itself, is nearly 40% in the United States. So nearly 40% of all people in the United States would be considered obese by the medical definition. Concern trolling is something that is an issue, and that is where people claim that they want to talk to you about losing weight because they're really worried about your health and well-being, but really it's just because they want to assume an air of moral superiority. Medical trauma is a major issue in the fat community. Now, some of you may have experienced this, but imagine walking into a medical appointment and when the nurse says, "I need to weigh you," the first thing you feel is a panic attack. Because never in your life has being weighed not come with some sort of judgment and trauma. Medical trauma is a serious issue, and it's something that prevents people from seeking medical care. It has prevented me from seeking medical care in the past. It has led to me refusing to see certain doctors again because of the way I've been treated in their offices. Over 40% of nurses, and this is according to a number of studies, have been open about saying that they are repulsed by fat patients and that they do not like treating fat patients and that they don't believe these patients are as worthy of their best care as patients who are not fat. These are nurses. And when nurses feel that way about their patients know it. When fat people see doctors, and I know I've spoken about this with a number of my colleagues who have experienced similar. Every single thing that you talk to your doctor about is an issue of your weight. No matter what it is, if you were to lose weight, your problem would be cured. And there have been instances of people complaining to the doctor about pain, weakness, vomiting, all of these medical issues, and be told, well, you just need to lose weight and it'll be fine. And these were people that had cancer. And because the doctor was not willing to look past the weight and actually do testing, those patients were in stage 3 cancer or stage 2 cancer when it could have been caught much earlier. These are not uncommon issues. These are things that happen all the time, not being taken seriously because of the fact that nobody can look past being fat. And they think that that's all that matters and that's all that is indicative of poor or good health. One of the things that we've been hearing a lot lately has gone along with the pandemic. So I remember early on in the pandemic, there was a lot of talk about when medical services get flooded, who is going to get care and who's not going to get care. And there were stories over in Italy about the fact that doctors and nurses were having to decide who is going to get life-saving care and who's going to be left to die. Well, they were leaving to die people who were deemed less likely to recover from COVID. And unfortunately, the assumption was that anybody who was obese, regardless of any other health issues, was going to be seen as less likely to recover. So quite literally, in Italy, people who were fat were left to die from COVID just because they were fat. And that was a rhetoric that made it over here to the United States when within the community we said, if it comes down to the point where the hospitals are overrun and there's not enough care for everybody, just based on being fat, we're the ones that are going to be left to die. That is a hell of a thing to think about. And now with the vaccine rollout in the state of New York, one of the things that qualifies you for getting the vaccine is obesity. If you are certain levels of obese, you are allowed to go get the vaccine. And I absolutely have gotten my first shot of the vaccine. But some of the rhetoric is, what, just because you've made unhealthy life choices, you are more worthy to get the vaccine than me. Why is it that fat people who do nothing but eat all the time can get the vaccine and I can't? So now there's a question of who is deserving of getting the vaccine, and why does being fat make you worthy of getting it? What makes you deserve this potentially life-saving injection? Mental health is a major issue in the fat community as well. Fat people are more likely to have eating disorders from childhood on. They are much more likely to experience depression and anxiety, much more likely to engage in self-harm behaviors, and sadly, much more likely than the average population to commit suicide, to attempt suicide and to complete suicide. There is actually, because of all of these shared understandings, shared meanings, there's actually a culture of fatness. And within that culture, there is a hierarchy that is based on how fat you are. So even within the fat community, there are fat ratings. Are you a small fat? Are you a large fat? Are you a super fat? And in the world, the fatter you are, the worse you're treated. If you look at shows like My 600-Pound Life, those shows have become mainstream, and they are one of the things that's contributed to people thinking it's amusing to judge people who are living in fat bodies. And fatness is often intersectional with other identities. Fatness has been seen to be intersectional, again, with mental illness. Fatness is intersectional with racism, with homophobia, with transphobia. So those are all different identities that are going to, add to what you're experiencing as a fat person. A fat Black woman is going to experience life differently from a fat white woman. But those different types of repression can go hand in hand. Now, within certain disciplines here on the college, just some of the things that I've seen. I've spoke about education, nursing. We need to think about how are we treating these topics in our curriculum. Yes, medical obesity is something we need to be aware of, but when we're talking about, medical obesity and in nursing, working with, fat patients, are we looking at it from a deficit model, or are we talking about how can we work with these patients in a way that leaves them dignified and feeling cared for? How can we do that? In our business and marketing programs, are we using, the marketing of diet products, the marketing of weight loss products? How are we treating that? Are we actually exploiting the vulnerability of fat people for the sake of marketing? Social work, my beloved social work is not alone in this. Many social workers treat larger clients badly because their perception also is that people choose to be fat. That's very clear in the literature. When I look at sports and exercise science, I was looking at the curriculum. They're teaching, future gym teachers. Much of what is experienced by fat people begins early on in school. So I remember gym class when I was in elementary and middle school being a very traumatic experience. How are people being taught to work with larger bodies? How are they being taught to help people with larger bodies become empowered to engage in movement, to feel like they can engage in movement without scorn, without ridicule? So some of the other things I want to address on campus, I had one student who was a residential student and told me that when she would go to the dining hall and use her meal plan that she paid the same for as everybody else, I believe it was in Brockway Hall, when she went to go get whatever the main dish was, the server would inevitably give her a, clearly smaller serving of food than she gave to everybody else. Every day, day after day. The student did not say, I would like a smaller portion. She was just given the smaller portion, she believes, because of the perception that she needed to eat less. People who are trying, and again, a lot of this was back before COVID, before, when people actually did things on campus. At the circ, students who would go to use the athletic facilities there felt like they were being belittled. Okay, felt like they were
now exiting.
Felt like they were being belittled, not only by other students, but by the people that were in charge of the circ. The auditorium seating on campus. I remember when Substantia Jones was here on campus, she made the observation that she gave her speaking engagement in a room that could not even comfortably hold fat bodies. So when we have auditorium seating, when we have seating in the ballroom with all those chairs that are squeezed next to each other, are we leaving room in those congregate seating areas for larger bodies to sit comfortably? In the classrooms, are we doing seating in classrooms in a way that any student and anybody can fit in there? There's a ton of bullying that goes on in the dorms. I know a lot of people think, well, these are college students, they're adults. Well, college students were high school students a short time ago, and high school students can be evil creatures. So bullying in dorms and rec halls, inclusion in campus organizations, particularly Greek life. A lot of people conflate fatness and disability. You can be fat and not be disabled. Certainly there are people who have disabilities that go hand in hand with their fatness, but you can be fat and be healthy and, you know, barring the barriers that other people have put in place, able to move around the world just fine. At the bookstore, this was something that I actually thought of in the past couple days. At the bookstore, where they sell all of the merchandise with all those nice t-shirts and sweatshirts and track pants and all those fun things, there is almost nothing that goes above a size 2X. And the size 2X isn't very large, and almost all those items are sold out. They're out of stock. So students who want to be proud of Brockport and who want to, you know, show their spirit are left with basically hats and scarves. So can we, you know, contract with somebody who's going to provide us with that sort of spirit attire that's in sizes more inclusive to the sizes of people on campus? How can we change our curriculum and our culture, our entire culture and our rhetoric to minimize emotional and psychological trauma to fat people? Within the college campus, I mean, it's been shown in employment, fat people are less likely to be promoted. They are likely to get lower scores on their assessments from students and from their supervisors. Students across the board will give lower, you know, the end of the year assessments to faculty members who are fat. Those faculty members are less likely to get hired in the first place. So we really need to reconsider our classroom dynamics and our dynamics across campus to allow accessibility and equity and dignity. Now, remember, one of the things we do on a college campus is we sort of help students unlearn some of what they assume they knew and help them, you know, learn how to go forward in the world a better person. And the only way we can do that is by reflecting on our part in making the world oppressive. And that's oppressive against everybody, including fat people. And I'm going to end there, and I'm open to questions, comments, discussion. Someone has their hand raised.
Yeah,
It's me.
Hey, Linda.
Go ahead.
Jen, you have, and this is just a compliment, you live around the corner from me, so I'm thinking of you in your little house right now. Mm-hmm. Just thank you for bringing this today. I know there's much more discussion, but you have just, in this short amount of time, I have goosebumps. My heart is just, I hear and I see and I feel, and I really appreciate you and bringing this to our attention, to our community. Here's my virtual hug.
Thank you, Linda. I feel
and
that
I just wanted to verbally acknowledge that your office is down the corner for me. We cross paths. This is powerful to me, and I hope others in the room feel that way. And we need to think about it. We need to do something. So thank you very much.
And I appreciate that, Linda. And one of the things that we need to be aware of, and I understand that now is not the time to say, let's get new furniture for classrooms. Now is not the time for that for many reasons. But I think one of the things we can do is assess where our resources are across campus and at least make sure that in every classroom there is at least some place where people with different bodies can sit, and not just one, because there's not just one larger person in the classroom. So even if you have a classroom with desks, make sure there's a few individual tables there. You know, make sure anybody who is larger, with mobility issues, whatever, can be in that classroom and be comfortable and be dignified and be able to learn. And I want to thank Nicole for her very kind comment over here.
Jess, I can't get, oh, now my hand's down, never mind.
Yeah, I put it down.
Oh my gosh.
Matthew was next, and
Okay.
I'll just say, if anyone goes by a name that's different than what I have displayed, I apologize. I'm just going to use whatever I see, but I think Matthew's hand was next.
Hi there. Thank you so much. This
Hi.
is great. My name is Matt Hall, and I'm the Assistant Director of Prevention Outreach Services.
Awesome.
But your comment about gym class really struck a chord with me. I read an article through Vox just recently and it was entitled "The Brief History of the Bizarre and Sadistic Presidential Fitness Test."
Mm-hmm.
And it was fascinating. I remember, my own challenges with that particular delight in gym class. But I'm wondering what your thoughts are in the ways that this has sort of become an ingrained part of the culture, and how even though we've maneuvered through and adjusted this sort of expectation as a country, how we are going to have, lasting legacies of bullshit, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And and I can speak to that. I remember those presidential fitness tests well and not doing very well at them. But yeah, absolutely. And I think what has happened is coming out of those, those elementary school gym classes is a lot of fat people have come out where anything related to exercise is traumatic. Anything related to physical movement is traumatic. There are, in the city of Rochester, my friend who works at St. John Fisher, she conducts yoga classes specifically for fat bodies. So there are now people who are seeing this need and they're realizing, yes, we need to move our bodies, but let's figure out within the community a way to do it in a way that is respectful and that sort of allows us to love ourselves instead of hate ourselves. And that is something that is an undoing of all the things we've been taught about our bodies throughout all these years. So that's a really good question, Matt. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I think Jen was next.
Okay. Hey, Jen. You're on mute.
Oh.
Good to see you again. Sorry about that.
Good to see you. And you and I have had these conversations.
Yes, we have. And it was wonderful to hear even more this time. But I have a question. I teach disability studies and education classes. And I know you said that fatness and disability are often conflated. But I've recently read a piece, not recently, I've repeatedly read a piece by Sammy Schock. Are you familiar with her?
I've heard the name. I haven't read anything though.
Okay, so last week, and if any of my students or former students are in here, which I recognize some names, perhaps you'll have some thoughts as well. She identifies as a fat, Black, queer woman.
Okay.
And her piece is called Coming to Claim CRIP. And she says, although I'm not disabled, many of the accessibility factors that I face in my life are similar to people with disabilities. So in many ways, our lived experiences in terms of accessing the world and being able to participate as full members are very similar. So that although she has many marginalized identities,
yes,
she chooses to identify with the CRIP community,
yes,
not as disabled. CRIP is the word. It's one of the critical theory offshoots of disability studies.
Yeah, it's
so
a reclamation. Yeah.
And so it's really interesting. Do you have thoughts on the concept of access and some of the parallels to that Sammy talks about? And if you haven't read it, I will share it with you. I love this piece and I use it extensively.
Yeah, I'd like it if you could shoot me the link for that. Absolutely. But yeah, and I think it goes along with a lot of what Milo just said over in the comments also. So I say that not to conflate it with disability, because while I think there are a lot of parallels between some of the issues faced by the disability community and the fat community, absolutely. And I think that part of the issue is that under ADA, fatness is not seen as a disabling condition. So just by virtue of being fat, we are not legally entitled to protections. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of people think, well, don't you qualify for any accommodation you need just because you're fat, which is what I was saying. And the fact of the matter is fatness is not a disability, but it does put us at many of the same disadvantages of people who do have a disability. So it does work well, to sort of act and work along with the disability community. And I think it's gotten to the point, and this goes to some of what Milo was saying over here, that we're moving away, at least in the community, from a place where we're trying to hide being fat and trying to almost shrink our bodies into a space where people don't have to look at us, to the point where we're like, hey, you know what? We are fat and we love ourselves. We not only do we accept ourselves, but we love who we are. Mm-hmm. We are proud of who we are, and we're not going to be apologetic for taking up space. And I can speak to me personally, it's taken me a long time to get there. and it's a work in progress. But it's, it's basically saying, this is who I am. And I can say for me personally, I would not, if given the choice to go back to my childhood and not be fat, I would not take it, because my experiences living in a fat body have made me who I am. And that's a person who I'm coming to love. And I don't know if that answered your question at all, Jen or Milo.
I think it does, but I think it highlights that there are different realms. And so in the social realm, you might have many similar experiences, but
Yes.
Yet politically and in all of these other areas where you don't have protections of the ADA, it's absolutely not the same. And it's interesting. I just find the parallels to be interesting. So yes, you did, but it just highlights how people's lived experiences can be very different depending on the area and the realm in which they're interacting.
Absolutely. And there's also the aspect of morality.
Mhm.
In that, people look at people being fat. Well, you must be fat because you've done nothing but eat cheeseburgers all day, every day for the past 2 decades. And, and I'm just going to say, a lot of people will start then to make excuses. Well, maybe they're fat because they have a hormone disorder. Maybe they're fat because of a thyroid issue. Maybe they're fat because they're on steroids. And I'm just going to put it out there, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're fat because of your thyroid or if you're fat because you do nothing but eat and sit on your butt all day. No matter why you're fat, you're worthy of the same dignity as any other human being. And I think we need to stop making excuses and saying, well, this person should be treated well because their fatness comes from this, and just say this person should be treated well because they're human.
Great, thank you.
And I think, Milo, I answered your question. Okay, good.
All right, I think Nikki was next.
Hi. So I'm the SAS coordinator. I don't know that we've met, but I am totally in love with everything you've been saying today. I just want to throw out there that under NYSED, so NYSED list of conditions, obesity is a qualifying condition as long as it's like identified as a disability. So medical model, all that stuff. I agree with everything that you said, medical model triggers, all that, totally agree. But I just want to throw it out there that students can come to our office and we can order furniture, but I do have to agree with you. You put a special desk and a special chair in Edwards and it's going to be off to the side, down on the floor, up at the top, and it's different from everybody else. Yeah. And so it taps into all those feelings and what if somebody else, it's not a perfect answer. But I do want to throw out there that if there's anything we can do, we will do, but you are 100% right that if I could, bulldoze a lot of the campus and rebuild it, it wouldn't be what it is today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank
you.
Thanks. I got a request to, apparently a few people can't see the chat, so they weren't privy to what Milo posted. So I'm just going to read that back really quickly before we go to the next question, which is from Serenity. So Dr. Oborn had typed in initially, kind of when Jen was asking her question, inquiring whether Dr. Wood could talk more about the intersections between fat pride, fat acceptance, and then the disability pride movements. And then so Jennifer expounded on that and some of the connections and some of the differences. And then Dr. Oborn also typed, thank you. I think the point about pride and identity as essential to equity and political justice is wonderful. And I agree that the medicalization of fatness and disability harms both groups, but with differential impacts. Okay. So thanks for letting me know about that issue. And so Serenity, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. So I was thinking back to a book I read when you started talking about morality and fatness, and the book is by Dr. Joy Arlene Renee Cox, and it's called Fat Girls in Black Bodies, Creating Our Own Communities. Yes. And there's a chapter in there where she discusses her experience being in the Black community and being very into church and religious, and how when she'd go there, it's kind of like thinness equated to holiness. and how the pastor would always talk about like gluttony and how we need God's mercy. And then she would question herself, like, oh my gosh, like I feel like I'm doing everything right. I'm trying to be like a good Christian, a good like steward of my religion, and I'm still not like meeting the match. So when you said like when people do the concern trolling, it's not actually about, oh, I'm concerned about your health, because it's like, if you're concerned about my health, you don't ask about any other aspect of my health, my mental, my emotional. It's only my physical being that you ask about. So it's like, is it really about my health, or do you want to feel superior to me because you feel like your body, your experience, you have more high ground opposed to me in a fat body? So I really resonated with that.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and that is one of the things that has always gotten to me, is sort of the moral aspect of it and the concern trolling. And this is something you see on social media all the time, when you see, and I've seen it on the articles, about the COVID vaccine and people who are fat getting the vaccine. All these people who will say, well, all you really need to do is just eat less and move your body around more, then you wouldn't even be at much as a risk from dying. And the reality is, they don't care if we move around. They don't care if we eat well. They just care that they feel the need to put us down. That's all that matters. So thank you for that, Serenity.
Thank you.
Thanks. Meg is next.
Okay. Hey, Meg.
Hello, Jen. How you doing? So,
how are you?
I used to work with Jen down in West Texas, and I inherited her statistics class. So I know exactly the classroom she's talking about with those terrible chairs and desks. The good news is they revamped that classroom. So it's no
did
longer.
they?
I know. We're moving slowly into the future. So, ironically, where we are in West Texas, we're in Amarillo, and we have an extraordinarily high rate of obesity, and because we're just a giant truck stop in America. And so we have a very high rate of obesity, but because we're also very conservative in a conservative part of the United States, the hostility towards Americans who are overweight or fat is extremely high. And I see it almost every single time that I send a student who is slightly overweight or heavy set into field. I'm a field director, and I see somebody going into field. It's amazing. It's like the hostility from the client, the hostility from other peers, and the hostility from the agency itself. I had to make several calls to the agency saying that you're harassing my student. You're treating them incorrectly. I had a student who went to her field placement, went on a ride along with another social worker, and that social worker said to my student, well, you're not going to get a man if you're at the weight that you are. You need to lose some weight. And you best believe I called that agency the next day and kind of let them know how unpleased I was. And so my question to Jennifer is that since you have lived in multiple different places of the country, do you feel that political attitudes like conservatism versus liberal, do political attitudes shape attitude towards fat acceptance? Would that be the correct term?
Yeah. In all honesty, Meg, I don't know that it does. I think that political attitudes kind of shape how willing people are to be overt about it.
Very okay.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, when I was down in Texas, people were much more blatant about it. They were much more blatant about, saying, this is what I think about your body. Up here, people are still thinking it and feeling it because it's so ingrained. They will just couch it more in that concern trolling.
Okay. Which is why I get the overall impression that people are just more hostile about it, because it's just that much more blatant and overt about it.
Yeah.
Very good observation. Thank you.
Thanks. And kind of going off of what Meg said, as far as how people are seen out in the field, people who are fat are seen as being inherently unprofessional and incompetent. A social worker that I know spoke of a medical provider they went to and said because that person was fat, they did not feel like they were competent enough to treat her. So that's something that you see across the board. And that was up here. That wasn't down in Texas. That was up here.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Justin?
Hi.
Hey, Justin.
First, I want to say thank you, Jennifer. Great presentation.
Thank you.
So I'm actually a faculty member over in kinesiology, sports studies, and physical education. And I teach, one of the courses that I teach is obesity and society. So this was a course that I inherited from another faculty member that has left the university. So I've tried to make it some adjustments and speak to some of the things that you talked about here.
Good.
But hearing you talk, one of the things that we do discuss in the course a little bit is kind of health outcomes and physiologically what having excessive body fat can potentially do or put you at an increased risk of. But hearing you talk, I'm now a little concerned that I don't want to perpetuate some of the stereotypes and and things of that nature. And you know, some of the things I do try to highlight with them is we do often hear the advice of exercise more and eat better, which is, you know, horrible advice because there's much more to it than that. But what are your thoughts? Like, is this a topic as far as potential comorbidities and all that maybe I should take out? Because again, I don't want to reinforce the stereotype and have students coming out of our program in my class thinking some of the things that we've talked about here, because that's not the purpose.
No, and I appreciate you. And I think, you know, it's a real topic. It is a real issue that, you know, people who are fat, you know, there may be a higher tendency towards some issues. So I think it's important for, you know, for people to be aware that there are health risks that go along with being fat. It's true. But I think there's also teaching people the respectful and dignified way to work with people with fat bodies. I think that's the most important thing. It's just realizing that, you know, fat people, we know we're fat. We know we're fat. We know our limitations, and maybe to take a cue from us on, you know, kind of what do we know we're capable or not capable of. And, you know, that whole in social work, we talk about knowing that people are the experts on their own existence and taking that standpoint, if that's helpful at all.
Yeah, that is. That's very helpful. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You.
We have some time for a few more questions.
I don't know how to raise my hand.
Okay, go ahead, Nicole.
Hi, Justin. Actually, this is for you. I'm a professor over in social work. I work with Jen. She knows this is, you know, my area is stigma. So this is like one of the big things for me also as a person of size. I know the person who created that course, and I know students who take that course, Justin, and they do love it. And I think, you know, the work that Jen's doing is a fantastic, you know, addition to our campus. And I would welcome any ongoing opportunity to have your students and our students have dialogues on this moving forward. I definitely would. And that goes for anybody, any department on campus. You know, this is just something that we know exists and just don't talk about it. So I would love for us to keep talking about it. So, thanks, Jen.
Yeah, absolutely. And interestingly, going on the topic of exercise science, I'm actually going to be speaking, Jerry Thompson invited me to speak to a group later this month about, you know, some of the issues of sizeism in college athletics. So
that's fantastic.
Yes, that goes along well with that.
And just in case anyone wants to raise their hand but isn't sure how to, near the top of your screen, there should be like a smiley face with a hand. And if you hover over that, then you want to click on the hand icon.
Yeah, I don't think I have the latest version.
Oh, maybe. Okay, Trish.
Hi, Jen. Great
Hi.
presentation. Jen and I teach together in social work as well. I'm also a lady of size who is owning the fat word. And so it also, in response to Justin's piece and what Nicole just said, Jen and I both teach diversity, equity, and justice classes, and also not to avoid the topic because you don't want to perpetuate some of these ideas, but to explicitly address it. In shifting, I also worked in public schools for 20 years prior to coming to Brockport 7 years ago, and helped districts to do their health education curriculum. So I think it's also about using a wellness model. How do you maintain and establish and sustain wellness? And as we all know, the research coming out now is you can be fat and be very healthy, or you can be skinny and not healthy. And
that's healthy at every size.
Exactly. And so I think it's really important. I love what Nicole just said about partnerships, but I think it's also important to explicitly discuss these topics in classes like that so that we are preparing the next round of professionals to be able to have these conversations.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, having people that are going to talk about fitness, it's so important to have people who are going to talk about it in a way that is accessible and, dignifying.
So I'll ask a question while we're waiting for everyone to jump in. So, you mentioned that buying all new furniture for campus right now in particular is probably not a feasible option, right? Although, by the way, I do know that the provost office, among others, have been looking at that issue and trying to upgrade furniture as they're able to, essentially. But I'm wondering what you see as some steps we might be able to take now in terms of raising awareness on our campus and or maybe even making some positive changes in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, just conversations throughout our disciplines about being more self-reflective, because again, critical fat theory says that anti-fatness is ingrained in everything we learn. So self-reflection in ourselves and in our curriculum, kind of like how are we portraying fatness in our curriculum? That's something we could start changing right now. Right. One of the things that I think of is even when we, in the days when we had students who came to our offices, those glorious days, thinking of the seating in our offices when we do office hours. Is that seating comfortable for any student who wants to come see us? Are there seats that already exist, even chairs in hallways that we might be able to kind of swap out? Are there ways to kind of mix up the seating in the classrooms to make it so people of any body can fit in there? I like, I was telling my students yesterday, I like classroom, I think it's Holmes 207. It's a classroom that has projector screens at both ends. It has round tables with chairs that the arms can be removed from. And it's a comfortable room that truly can fit just about anybody. And there's room between the tables so that people with mobility issues can get around the tables. So are there ways to maybe shift some of our current resources and mix up the seating so that people have a place to sit and that it's not necessarily that one little table up in the front? And I think also just adding the concept of sizeism to our diversity rhetoric. When you look at diversity statements, it talks about many, many facets of diversity. Body size and composition is not there. And your body size and composition is something that is truly going to command every aspect of how you live your life, from having to look at restaurant pictures to say, do they have booths or do they have chairs that I'll be comfortable in, to worrying about getting on a flight to go visit family. So it's kind of those sorts of things. Like, is it even in our language and on our radar to make this part of what we consider when we think about accessibility and diversity? And I think those are all things that could be started right now.
Absolutely. We have a couple more hands up now. So Rogan?
So mine is more, I guess, of like an open dialogue rhetoric type of question where in today's culture, like oftentimes we run into people that they have a hard time accepting themselves. And I know somebody that's extremely personal to me that goes through a hard time, and they literally go to the gym like 7 days a week and they kill themselves and they wear them out. And like the biggest thing that like stands out to me is like when they ask me, do I look different? Do I look better? Do I look less fat? Do I look like this? And I almost like now thinking about it, like whenever we go, oh, you're not fat, or you're not, when we make comments like that, I almost feel like that's offensive in a way, because one way it's like saying, no, you're not, but at the same time, it's also negative towards people that are still healthy, that are. So like, I guess my question is, how do you have a conversation to make somebody aware that regardless of how they are or what they are, they can still be healthy, and without using the terminology, oh, I'm fat, in a negative term? Or like, is there like some type of language or accessibility or I guess way to go about helping somebody in that community that may not necessarily be entirely in that community, but struggling with acceptance of themselves in the way that like it's not negative towards one community?
Right.
I don't know if that's making any sense.
It does. It absolutely does make sense, and I do get what you're saying. So it's kind of that fear of being fat is the worst possible thing that could happen, right?
Yeah, basically.
That fear that at all costs you want to avoid being a fat person, and believe me, I've heard that. I've heard that a lot, and I think what I have said to people like that is that it's more a matter of how you feel in your own skin. How do you feel in your own skin? And I've said to people, I have someone who's very close to me who had weight loss surgery and had skin reduction surgery and was posting, pictures of her weight loss journey. And you would have all these people like, oh, you look so great now. You look so wonderful now. And I think it's important. And what I said to her was, I think you always looked wonderful. How do you feel? Mm-hmm. And I think that's what it's about. I think it's about making it not how do you appear to others, how are you perceived by others, but how are you feeling in your own skin?
Yeah. Well, I've noticed it a lot more in like postpartum women, like women that go through that sudden drastic change, and they try so hard to get back to, that perfect body that everyone just assumed was there. Not realizing or accepting the fact that like your body just did something amazing, and it's not gonna rebound the same way. And everybody, as you get older, you don't rebound the same way. Yeah. But at the same time, society has, I guess, trained us to be like, no, you're not fat. No, you look great. No, this is how it is. And at the same time, that's also very negative towards the community of, fat people or people of different body types. And that whole rhetoric, I mean, I'm guilty of it. I've said it, and now thinking about it, I'm like, that's terrible. Like, you can't say that, because it's the way that it is said has been ingrained in us for so long that that's how we are.
But Logan, I've said it too. I am fat, and I've said it too, because it is so ingrained in us. And I think the important thing is just to really put it back on the person and just make it about how do you feel about yourself. That's what it's all about. It's not about how other people perceive you. How do you feel about yourself in your skin, in your body?
Thank you. Looks like we have a question next from Jasmine.
Yes. Being like my major is like education, with being inclusive for grades 1 through 6, and my minor is like disability studies. I've always like thought of like this because as a child, I was that kid that was a fat kid, and like the effect of that in my school experience kind of still sits with me. My question is, how do you think we can like put more examples of like acceptance of all body types into kids' minds at an early age? Because I feel like it's very important for kids of all sizes to feel very important and very comfortable with their body at an early age through either like what you teach or like what happens in your gym class, because I know that was a big factor in my early age.
Well, I think because those ideas are ingrained so early in life. I mean, I remember kids in kindergarten already knowing, fat people are not as good. I think so much of it is going to come from representation. So when we are using books, when we are showing, cartoons, when we're showing movies, how are fat people portrayed in those books? Are they portrayed? So maybe making a focus, we can publish them ourselves, or trying to find actual things to give kids that show, equal representation of people of all different bodies, and them basically going through life, doing the same things, enjoying the same things that thin children do. And the same thing with shows. Are we showing them things that paint, the fat people as the butt of the joke, or are they just people? And I think it's just so important to start with representation as soon as children can start perceiving differences between people.
Thanks. Deneen, you're next, but I don't know if you changed your mind. She put her hand down, so similarly, Serenity, I know you had your hand up. Did you have another question?
Yeah, it was like just a comment, but it's okay.
Okay. No problem. Grace also has a question.
So we've been talking a lot about how this like fear of fatness is so ingrained in our culture, which I see a lot like in like seating and also like young adolescents and even further up like people's desire to be thin. But do we know where historically this began and where this like idea against fatness and compulsion to be thin has like began and how it became so ingrained in our culture?
I have not done a ton of study on sort of the etiology on fat phobia. I do know if you look historically, and this is, a lot of this women or people who identify as women experience this more generally than male identifying people. But if you look even in art throughout the ages, there were times when the standard was people, with larger bodies. That was the standard of beauty. So I don't really have an answer to that, and it's something I would be interested in looking more into.
Okay, any other questions? Anna?
Hi, I know there was a lot of talk about like body positivity and self-love. Do you see that changing how we perceive and talk about, fat, like going down the road, like us as a society?
A lot of that, the fat acceptance, that's more internal to the community, because while we do try, to say, everybody should be accepting of everybody no matter their body, really it has come down much more to fat people being accepting of ourselves, because we're not at a place yet where the larger society has been able to be accepting of us. So it's kind of more us having confidence in how we exist in the world. And then hopefully, as we gain more confidence, maybe that'll filter down to the rest of the community.
Thanks. Emily?
Hi, yes. I had a question about for a bigger person, like what would you recommend doing if they are facing discrimination, if they're socially or like medically from doctors and nurses and people not taking them seriously because of their weight?
Well, what I have done is find your local community of fat people. There is a whole community in Rochester. We have a Facebook group. So what I would do is if it's discrimination, like if I felt like I was being discriminated against here on campus, I would file a bias report. I would speak to people, get some guidance. But as far as doctors go, I believe, and this could be a privileged statement, that you need to trust your doctor to have your best interests at heart. So when I was looking for a new doctor, I went to my group of my peers and I said, can you recommend a doctor who is going to affirm me as I am? And they found that doctor. She's through UR Medicine. I absolutely adore her. And what she has said is, if weight loss is something that's important to you, we could talk about that, but let's just talk about your overall well-being. And she's amazing. So that would be my recommendation, is if you have the ability to change doctors, never ever stick with a doctor who only looks at you as a fat person and not as a whole human being.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, well, it looks as though we've gone through all the questions. So I just want to thank you all for being here, and especially thank Jennifer for sharing all of this wonderful information with us and raising our awareness about sizeism and how it might play out in real life situations on our campus.
Yeah, thank you all for joining. Thank you for listening to me, and it was an honor to be able to speak to you all.
I'd like to ask if anyone's willing to do this, if we could turn on our cameras and turn on our microphones for a minute and just give Jennifer a round of applause for being here with us today.
You're all smiling faces. Thank you.
Yes, thank you again. If anyone has any further questions, you can look up, of course, Dr. Wood in the directory, or you can email me. This session was also recorded, so if you know people that would like to see it or want to get access to it, again, just shoot me an email or shoot Jennifer an email, and we'll figure out how to support you in that way.
Yes, and thanks. And as Dr. Oborn said, thank you to the Committee on Accessibility